In this lesson, we'll finish up setting up the compositing tags, and we'll also pin up our textures so that they don't move because of our deformers. Okay, so just watching this back in the view that we have here, you can't really tell if anything bad is happening to your textures. But I want to show you a render that I created whenever I was working on this project initially, and some weird things started happening because of the jiggle deformers and the way that they make these objects move around. So you'll notice that the error doesn't happen on things that don't have a jiggle deformer. So let's go ahead and see what that does. I'm going to just pull up this little video for you. And you'll notice that I'm figuring that this is happening because of the jiggle deformer, because the freeform deformer objects are only these two right here. We didn't have a freeform deformer on this piece of guts, only jiggle deformer. And so I don't have everything in place here, but I do have this static object that doesn't have a jiggle deformer. It is moving, but the textures stay nice and pinned exactly where they should be. So this is kind of a situation that is a perfect storm, is basically what's happening. There is a procedural texture which is basically projected onto your geometry, and I'm using a jiggle deformer with that, and so every time it moves that, it basically is getting confused, and it's almost like the projection is being projected in one way, and then whenever this moves behind it, it almost looks like the geometry is a mask and the texture is behind it. So this really weird kind of sliding effect that you can see it really well right there, just kind of going crazy. So this is happening because of that deformer. Now, another thing that was different about this one is that I also had my intestines being created from splines and sweep NURBS, and I had not yet converted them to polygons. So I went in and converted them to polygons, and then I added this tag that I'm about to show you. So if you are working with sweep NURBS and splines, and you add the tag, and you haven't converted it to polygons, you're still going to have this problem. This will not be fixed. What I'm about to show you only works if you're working with polygon objects. So you're like, well, man, polygon objects are going to increase my poly count a lot, and it's going to be really hard to work with any kind of speed. You can go in and reduce that poly count by a few different ways. The circle that you would be using on your sweep NURB doesn't have to have 1,000,000 points on it. You can make it only have 4. That's going to make a huge difference. You can increase the angle that your sweep NURBS is allowing to be between points. It'll make it look really jagged and crazy at first, but as you can see in this project, if I turn off, let's turn off the sweep NURBS on any one of, or excuse me, the hyper NURBS on any one of these. See how that gets really pointy looking? You can just drop a hyper NURBS on there, and it'll be nice and smooth, and then you'll still be able to have a quick rendering project, and the tag that we're going to use will also work with this. So all this talk about the tag, let's go ahead and do that. Now, if you're not working on your own project, and you're just using our project files, you can just kind of pick up from what I'm about to say right now with this tag, and your project's going to look fine. You won't have that slipping, sliding texture problem. But if you did build your own guts, or you're doing this on another project later on, it's really important just to pay attention to the way that I have this set up, where a polygon is beneath in the hierarchy of this hyper NURB that basically represents the same thing. So that is very important. So now for the tag. We'll come up here to tags, go to Cinema 4D tags, and you're going to come almost all the way to the bottom, about, well, just a little more than halfway, and it's the stick texture tag, and that is it. All you have to do is drop that one little tag on there, and this will make you go crazy if you don't add this, because you'll be looking at those slipping, sliding textures and you won't know why it's happening. So it needs to be on the same level in the hierarchy as your other texture. So you've got your texture tag, and then you've got your stick texture tag. Now, you don't really have to go in here and change anything. You just have to have that on there. So anything that has a jiggle deformer and or a freeform deformer, just you can put it on there anyway. Anything that is having some kind of dynamic movement because of that sort of deformer needs to have this. So really, I dropped it onto the skin because I had that selected, but that isn't really jiggling at all. But our dark organ is, so let's move it up onto that. Light organ, we don't have any movement from dynamics or from a jiggle deformer. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about the skin. The skeleton, it does have a bend deformer, so it's possible that it could happen to this one. So let's just be safe. It's not going to hurt anything. We'll go ahead and put this on our skeleton as well. So you want to control drag that stick texture from the first place that you put it onto the next place that you want to have that. And let's see here. Our spine punch through, that doesn't get any kind of jiggle. Don't worry about that. Let's look at those large intestines. Absolutely, those have jiggle deformers on them, so we'll control drag down to that one with the texture. And you see how they're going onto the same level in the hierarchy as the ones that have all those other tags. So it's kind of nice because it keeps all your tags together by doing it this way. That's kind of why I was saying keep those tags on the polygon object instead of trying to put it on the hypernerves. Even though it'll work, it's easier to keep track of. Okay, one more down here on the heart. And that looks pretty good. So we've got it on everything that jiggles and everything that has a deformer that might be questionable that it could cause this problem, because it's not going to hurt anything to have too many. Okay, so textures are stuck. We're good now. Don't worry about that anymore. And now we are going to move on to the next part of this compositing, which is we've got our alpha channel that is going to be containing our shadow. So let's say we go into our render settings and we put out a render and we say, make me an alpha channel. What it will contain is the shadow and the alpha for this right here. So with everything the way it's set up now, we won't have an alpha for just these guts. It's always going to contain the shadow. So what we need to do is set up an object buffer that will spit us out a separate alpha that only is for the guts. So we'll have a shadow alpha and a guts alpha, and then we'll have our RGBA or our RGB pass of just our colors here. So we need to set up an object buffer. How do we do that? Let's get started on that by kind of collapsing everything up, and we'll be able to add that just to this zombie right here, because our plane that's going to have the texture, or excuse me, the plane is going to have the shadow on it. We don't have to worry about that at all. Everything we need that alpha for that we're about to create with the object buffer is contained in this zombie null object. So we'll come up here to tags, go to Cinema 4D tags, and you're going to add another compositing tag, which is what we added to the sky. But this time, with that tag selected, instead of changing anything here in your tag tab, go to your object buffer tab. And what you want to do is simply enable buffer 1. That's all you have to do. And what that's going to say is everything that's inside of this null object will get dropped into buffer 1. Now for this to work, we have to set it up in our render settings. We have to go into those render settings and say, we want you to render out buffer 1. But because we've got it set up here, it'll be able to look at everything that's in that null object and use that. Okay, so in the next lesson, we will do just that. We'll begin rendering our guts and everything else that goes along with that. And we need to set up those render settings. And there is a very specific way that you need to do it to be able to get this object buffer, to make sure that your passes come out correctly, and to make sure you get the right amount of frames and that everything's the right size. And there's so many things to take care of to make sure that you get a good render. This render has been taking my computer about 3 hours to do at 1280 by 720. So keep that in mind. In the next lesson, we'll be setting up this render and setting it off. And then in the lesson after that, we will actually be picking up in Nuke. So if you've made it this far, you are halfway through the course. And the next lesson is just going to be our render settings, but it's very important to be able to get everything we need for our composite.